Good morning, everyone. It's really great to see all of you here. Throughout my career, there has been one thing that has always been the foundation, and that has been data. In cybersecurity, everything is based on data. In business, everything is based on data. When I make investments, I'm looking for founding teams that are laser-focused on data about their business. And data only works if you take it as it comes. You need to take the bad news with the good news. So let's take a look at Europe and the state of the digital union. And let's take the data as it comes. Why is this important? Technology has become increasingly a core part of our societies and our lives. And especially exponential technologies tend to creep up on us. We may not notice how quickly things change in a fundamental way. For example, the same amount of memory that was in the lunar lander several decades ago, guiding it to land safely on the moon, is nowadays in the singing birthday card that you can buy from any bookstore. Things just happen at a rapid pace. So let's think about the importance of technology. There are two categories. There's the intrinsic value of technology, the wealth that is created through the creation of new technology. And then there's the indirect value, the increased efficiency, the increased quality, the things that were not possible before the creation of that technology. But let's start with the value. Just for the fun of it, a few months ago I took the 5 most valuable US-based tech companies, just 5 companies. And then I started listing how many companies from Europe I need to list to get to that same value. So I took all the companies listed in the UK. Nowhere near enough. I added the value of all the companies listed in Germany. Not nearly enough. Added all the companies listed in Norway, in Sweden, in Finland. Not quite enough. Added all the companies listed in the Baltic countries and ended up roughly at the same level as the value of the 5 largest tech companies in the United States. And obviously all our tech companies, or many of our tech companies, are also listed in the London exchanges, in Germany, in the Nordics, and in the Baltics. So one can safely say that we are way behind in wealth creation. And the logic should really go the way that through university research, we come up with fundamental new ways of doing things. And then the entrepreneurial process will scale those up so that they really have a global impact. Did you know that Europe is still a superpower in university research? About 1/3 of the world's university research is carried out in Europe. So we have retained our position. So if we would assume that the university research would be converted to innovations and business in the same proportion, then we should have 1/3 of the world's tech companies in Europe. So let's take an experiment. Let's divide tech into its 8 most important subcategories. And let's pick 5 of the largest companies by revenue in each category from the world. That means 40 companies, 8 times 5. So we should have roughly 15 companies of those in Europe. Any guesses how many of those 40 are European companies? There's 21 US-based companies, 10 Chinese companies, 4 European companies, a couple Japanese, a couple South Korean companies. Out of those 4 European companies, one is Accenture. which is not a European company. It's located in Ireland for reasons that you can guess. And then we have Nokia, Ericsson, and SAP. So we are not converting research to scalable business in the right ratio compared to other regions. But let's look at how old these companies are. The 21 American companies are on average about 45 years old. So the Microsofts and so forth are getting pretty old. The 10 Chinese companies are roughly 25 years old, so quite a bit younger. The youngest European company on that list is older than the average companies in the United States. SAP was founded in 1972, so they are over 50 years old. So during the last 50 years, we have been unable to add a single company in Europe to this list. And that's not a good result. Another point of view to the same inability to convert research into business. Let's take DARPA. What has DARPA generated for us? GPS. What else? The graphical user interface and the mouse. The internet. Do you know what the cumulative funding for DARPA is up to date? It's about 50 billion since the Sputnik moment, many decades ago. Horizon program, which is Europe's DARPA, has a cumulative funding of over 200 billion. Who could tell me what is the greatest innovation coming out of the Horizon programs? Like the GPS or the internet or the graphical user interface and the mouse. Anybody? So we have put 4 times as much money in a much shorter period of time, and we are unable to give one example of the great outcomes. So this is what I meant, that we need to take the data as it comes. It's not always pleasant. The importance of tech companies carries on. It's not just about the early stages. If we take all the venture capital funded companies listed in the United States, that's about half of the stock market value in the United States, which is quite significant because venture capital is a young phenomenon comparatively. The more important finding is that 82% of all R&D carried out in the United States by public companies comes from these previously venture capital funded companies that cumulatively account for half of the stock market value. But they do over 80% of all R&D. So this entrepreneurial movement that converts deep science into new businesses, solves our existential challenges, makes our lives easier, faster, smoother. They carry on by investing into new R&D. In the consumer internet, where we are not really playing very well, Europe's share is 4%. The US has 60%, China has 30%, and Europe has 4%. And this is pretty meaningful, as the global market cap for consumer internet was about 7.5 trillion just a few months ago. It's a little bit lower at the moment. So as a continent, we have pretty much lost the B2C race. But there are other races. There's the B2B race. where we are much better positioned. And maybe there's also a G to C race, a government to citizen race, where we could be doing well in the future if we get our act together. But that would require us to truly create a digital single market in Europe. We should be able to generate common ways of doing things across the different European countries. And we are still far away from that. We are also behind in cybersecurity in Europe. But let's be specific, how are we behind? Because we are not behind in technology. We are not behind in technology capabilities or expertise. Our challenge is that the European innovations, the smart founders, engineers, companies tend to be acquired, and they become mostly American companies. And as a result, we have become quite dependent on imported cybersecurity technologies, without fully realizing what the consequences will be in the long term. So let's talk a little bit about where that technology comes from. Most of it comes from the United States, but a surprisingly large part comes from China, not necessarily sort of primarily cybersecurity technology, but communication technology. And a portion of it comes from Russia. So let's think about this for a moment. So when we rely on Chinese and/or Russian technology in areas that are relevant to cybersecurity, we should not be thinking about how reliable is that vendor, because that actually is completely irrelevant. We should be thinking about two things. We should be looking at what is the national legislation in the country of origin for that vendor. And we should be looking at what is the behavior of the security agencies and intelligence agencies in that country. So let's take China, for example. The legislation in China is quite favorable to the local security agencies. It makes it mandatory for any Chinese company to support those intelligence and security agencies when they ask. It even protects any Chinese citizen from the repercussions of them assisting these authorities and maybe getting fired, so they get financial support from the government if that happens. And if that's the case, we should be asking ourselves, are the security and intelligence agencies doing their job or not? If they want to keep their jobs, they need to do whatever they can to be successful. And of course they use their technology companies. They have a legal right to do so. So they will simply be fired if they don't. And if we talk about Russia, let's think about the behavior of these agencies, regardless of the legislation. So we can think about Litvinenko and Polonium. We can think about Navalny and Novichok. We can think about Crimea and NotPetya. And we can think about the DNC email server and Donald Trump. And then we ask ourselves, would these people not lean on the local technology companies when they want something? And this is how we need to think about the vendors, and not actually the vendors, but the nations they come from. What is the legislation and what is the behavior? The United States is our friend and ally, has been for a long time and will be for the foreseeable future. However, we all know that they are constantly running cyber operations on our soil. How do we know that? Because they have been caught red-handed a number of times. Also, the US has legislation that makes us worry. The Original Storage Act, which many of you are familiar, provided access to the government to the data storage on US soil. But that was not enough. So the Cloud Act was set into motion. And the Cloud Act extends that capability to data centers outside the United States. It's very challenging to judge what kind of a risk, if any, this is, because the US is our friend and ally. But we need to think about it, because these are data points, these are facts, and we cannot shut our eyes from facts. For me personally, it has always been important to keep this company a European company. I think it's an advantage to us wherever we operate, whether we operate in Japan, whether we operate in South Africa, in South America. The rule of law, the sticking to regulation in Europe is stronger than almost anywhere in the world. And we Finns are widely known to be so non-imaginative that we couldn't even think about misusing our access to data. Our government is so non-ambitious that they couldn't even dream about wanting to become a superpower. So I have always felt that it is an advantage to be European and to be a Finnish company. And that is how I personally want to keep things, because I think it's good for the company, it's good for our shareholders, it's good for our customers, it's good for our country and region and the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Risto. What a great opening. Now we have time for one question from the audience, so if you raise your hand, our crew will get over a microphone to you as soon as possible. But
politically sensitive questions are much appreciated.
all right, that's a challenge.
Yeah.
So raise your hand if you have a question and we'll get the microphone over to you. Oh, there we are.
Hello, Giancarlo Calzetta from Thomson Hardware. This situation in Europe is definitely, the tech situation in Europe is definitely gloom, as you notice it, but there's a big problem here. I come from Italy. There are very little cybersecurity software vendor in Italy. And when I ask them why there are so few companies of this kind, they say it's much easier to put up a company selling cybersecurity services than making up a company that makes software, because we are way behind the rest of the world. That's a big barrier. I don't see how this can be overcome, also on a political level, because you can put money on that, but you just don't need money, you need a project. Yeah. What's your thought on that?
Well, if I had had 10 more minutes, I could have gone to the positive things in Europe. We have a clear rise in entrepreneurship. We have much more venture capital in the area. We have more unicorns than ever before. The Nordics, I mean Sweden, Finland, and Estonia, they are at par with Silicon Valley in their ability to create value per capita and per investment. And the same is happening elsewhere in Europe as well. In Finland, we have quite a lot of cybersecurity companies. And I think this company has a lot to do with it. We have been in the business for 35 years, and we have generated lots of competence in the country and set an example. And that's how things happen. You just need one that starts it and starts accumulating the competence, training people. And then some of them leave, they start new companies. Sweden is experiencing the same. There are small companies in cyber popping up. There are not any large companies yet, but they are growing. And this can happen elsewhere in Europe as well. So I have a positive feeling about the future as long as the governments would do their job of creating the right environment for entrepreneurship. They don't need to give us money. They need to create the environment to scale our businesses across different countries in Europe without setting up a huge project to expand from, let's say, Sweden to Denmark. That should be a complete non-issue instead of a project. But today, expanding from Germany to France, it's a huge project. And that's something we need to fix. And I'm sure there are more good Italian cybersecurity companies as well. We have acquired one from Italy, a hardware security company. I'm sure the team is somewhere here today as well. They are absolutely brilliant. Some of the best hardware security people in the whole wide world. So high appreciation for the Italian know-how.
Great. Thank you, Risto. Thank you for your question. Way to end on a positive note. So thank you for your very important message. Let's give Risto a round of applause.